Sometimes it seems to me that that evening began long before I first saw the bar counter decorated with glowing bottles and heard the bass vibrating in the air, as if the heart of this place were beating irregularly. It began in the afternoon when I was getting ready, standing in front of the mirror, fixing my hair and catching myself thinking that I was tired. Tired of everyday life, of work, of the endless schedule where every minute is planned in advance. And this bachelorette party seemed to me like a little slice of freedom, where I could stop being a wife, a colleague, a responsible person, for at least a second and just be myself. When we entered the bar, I felt as if I had been swept away by a wave. American bars often look like a movie set. Slightly dim lighting, neon signs, a hum of voices that blend into a single noise, making it impossible to understand what each person is saying individually. Everything around me was too bright, too loud, too lively. And maybe that's what I was looking for at the time. Contrast. Something that would pull me out of my usual routine. My friends were in a great mood. They laughed, sincerely, easily, as if there were no worries in the world. And I, drawn into their energy, allowed myself to relax. The first cocktail slipped inside like a warm wave, the second serving, like permission to turn off the internal filter, that eternal control that we adults wear like a seatbelt. I wasn't drunk, rather, slightly liberated. But there is a risk in this state. You feel lighter than you really are and allow yourself more than on ordinary days. The music grew louder, the people bolder. The bachelorette party went on as usual. Toasts, funny stories, flashes of phones capturing moments that tomorrow would seem exaggeratedly bright. I felt like I was part of this evening, but at the same time, it was as if I was watching myself from the outside. It was as if everything that was happening was a short pause between life before and life after. Although at the time, of course, I didn't know how right I would be. When I looked around the room, it seemed to me that everyone here was letting go of something. Tension, masks, expectations. And so was I. I just wanted to forget that tomorrow the work calls, to-do lists, questions about what to cook for dinner, and reminders about small household chores would start again. There, in that bar, everything seemed simpler. People were smiling, music was playing, and you allowed yourself to get into the rhythm. If someone had come up to me then and said, "Stop. You'll remember this evening for the rest of your life, not in the way you think," I would have just laughed. After all, it was just a regular bachelorette party. A regular evening. A regular attempt to relax. I didn't know that there would be a moment ahead that would cut my life with a thin but clear line. If someone had asked me then who worked at that bar, I probably wouldn't have been able to remember a single face. Bartenders, waiters, security guards. They usually blend into the background, becoming part of the overall atmosphere, like music or the smell of citrus from cocktails. But that evening, one person stood out from the decor. Not immediately. Rather, it was as if someone had quietly turned up the brightness on one part of the picture. I noticed him when he was just walking by, not looking at me. Tall, confident, but not cocky. Such people have a special plasticity, characteristic of those who work in places where people relax. Their movements are light, as if they are not carrying a tray but leading the air behind them. He was wearing the usual black uniform, the same as the others, but for some reason it fit him differently, as if it had been made especially for him. I caught myself watching him for too long. It was awkward, almost adolescent. I hadn't looked at men like that in a long time, with unexpected, almost uncontrollable attention. Not because I had stopped noticing others. It's just that after marriage, that kind of gaze becomes something unnecessary, inappropriate, and most importantly, not your tool. You learn to filter your attention just as an adult learns to filter unhealthy food. You want to, but you shouldn't. But at that moment, the filter failed. Maybe it was the cocktail, maybe it was the noise, maybe it was just accumulated fatigue which makes a person more transparent to their own weaknesses. He spoke to us for the first time when he brought us another round of drinks. My friend was laughing somewhere nearby, one of the girls was talking about gifts and the wedding breakfast, but all I could hear was his voice, calm, professional, with a slight hoarseness. And then I caught his eye. It wasn't a bold, deliberate, "I see you" kind of look. Rather, it was a brief moment of human contact that happens when two people look up at the same time. But something about it caught my attention, too much for it to be just customer service. He stepped back, continuing to work, and I felt as if something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically, not consciously. Just like in American movies where the heroine is sitting in a bar and suddenly the music fades for a second, and the air seems to thicken. I tried to switch gears and rejoin the conversation. I laughed at my friends' jokes and listened to their stories, but out of the corner of my eye, I still caught sight of his silhouette. He moved quickly like a man accustomed to evenings of full houses. There was no hint of flirtation. No attempts to attract attention. And there was something dangerously attractive about that. When a person does nothing but you still feel that he is somehow different. Sometimes he would walk by and we would exchange that brief, almost weightless glance. Meaningless. Unplanned. Just a glance. But each time it left me with a feeling as if someone had touched my skin with their fingertips. Just barely. I remember telling myself, "You're just tired. He's just a handsome guy at work. Stop dramatizing." I even smiled at my thoughts. But perhaps that was the moment it all began. Not with a touch. Not with words. But from the moment I admitted that I had noticed him. He was still part of the bar's atmosphere. But he was no longer the background. Sometimes I think that alcohol is not about courage or liberation. It works more like a dimmer switch that gradually mutes the voice of your conscience until it becomes a faint background barely noticeable. And that evening, that's exactly how I felt. Not drunk and delirious, but a soft, barely noticeable shift in my inner support. It was as if I was standing on a flat surface, but one of my moral rules had tilted slightly. I remember the taste of the cocktail, sour with a hint of passion fruit. I remember my friend telling a story about how her fiancé once tried to impress her parents and mixed up salt and sugar, ruining a whole pot of some family recipe. We laughed, clapped our hands, and pretended that this evening was just an excuse to celebrate something big and bright. But somewhere beneath all this merriment, I felt a strange inner tremor, as if something silky was trying to spread its wings inside me. After the second cocktail, the music seemed louder, the people brighter, and I felt lighter. Do you know that feeling? When you seem to be in control, but deep down you understand that part of you has already gone beyond its usual limits. Not crazy actions, not a desire to destroy. Just, the brakes disengaged. A small switch that didn't click loudly but did its job. I caught my reflection in the mirrored tile behind the bar and didn't recognize myself. My face looked relaxed, my gaze free, and I thought, God, when was the last time I looked like this? When did I allow myself to just be a girl who wants to feel alive? Not a woman who has to be right all the time. At some point, I noticed that I was looking for him with my eyes. Not on purpose. Not persistently. More like automatically, the way people look for the source of a melody that's stuck in their head. I didn't think of him as a man, I didn't make any plans, I wasn't even aware of the slightest desire. But something intangible, open, appeared inside me. And it scared me a little. He came back to us with the tray. And when he put down the drinks, our fingers touched each other slightly, just a little bit. It was accidental, completely mundane, but I felt something shift inside me. Not loudly, not sharply. Just a little click. I quickly pulled my hand away as if I had been burned. But it wasn't about his touch. It had no romantic context. It was about the fact that my body reacted differently than it should have. Essentially, more emotionally, as if it reminded me that I was alive. That I was a woman. That I feel. Stop, I told myself. It's just the alcohol. Just fatigue. Just a night where you allowed yourself to breathe. But that inner voice didn't sound so confident anymore. The alcohol muffled it slightly, like the hum of an air conditioner muffles the ticking of an old clock. I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't even think about it. It was just an impulse that appeared and hung in the air between us, like static electricity on a winter day. Almost invisible but palpable if you put your hand close to it. It wasn't desire. It wasn't premeditation. It was a state of mind. And it was this state of mind that became the first crack in the ice, along which the fault line then ran. To be honest, I still can't say at what exact moment everything took a turn for the worse. Sometimes it seems to me that it was inevitable, as if the whole evening was a long row of dominoes, and someone had quietly pushed the first one. In other versions of my memory, it was a single impulse, a momentary weakness that could only have happened in that particular place at that particular second and no other. Everything was too ordinary, too mundane when it all began. He came over to collect the empty glasses and my friends were distracted. Someone decided to go to the ladies' room, someone reached for their phone, someone laughed at something I didn't even hear. I was left alone for a second, like a person in a movie who suddenly notices that the surrounding noise has become quieter. This feeling of silence, by the way, was the strangest thing. There was no real silence, the bar was buzzing like a beehive. But inside me there was a pause. He looked at me just to make sure he could take the glasses. And for some reason he lingered. Just a little. Not the way a man looks at a woman he wants to impress. More like a person who has noticed that something is going on with someone else. Maybe he saw my strange state, my detachment, my, however it may sound, transparency at that moment. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. So quietly that I heard him through the music. This phrase, the simplest phrase there could be, somehow touched something painfully alive in me. Maybe because I hadn't heard anyone ask that sincerely in a long time, not out of habit, not in passing. My husband always asked, "How was your day?" That's different. It's safer, more familiar. But here, "Are you okay?" As if he saw me more deeply than he should have. I nodded. And perhaps that was the moment when everything could have been stopped. But I felt my own body betraying me, not with desire, not with passion, but with something quieter, more dangerous. A willingness to let go of control just a little more. Just one more millimeter. He took a step back, about to leave, but suddenly, as if spontaneously, he nodded toward the side exit. The very balcony where the employees smoked. The gesture was simple. "Want some air?" No hint. No suggestion. More like concern. Maybe even professional concern. Waiters often see people in different states. Why I agreed, I still don't know. I told myself it was just a moment of silence. Just to go out, walk around. Just to breathe. There was no hidden meaning. I didn't think it could lead to anything more. Honestly, I didn't think at all. We went out onto the balcony. Behind the door, the music immediately became muffled, as if someone had covered the speaker with a pillow. The air was cool, smelling of the night city and the kitchen working one floor below. A light breeze touched my hair. Everything seemed calm, as if the world had decided to give me a chance to think. He stood nearby, but at a respectful, appropriate distance. And that made me feel even more uncomfortable than if he had come closer. Because it meant that whatever happened next would not depend on him. It would depend on me. We talked about something meaningless. About how late they close. About what a fun evening we were having. About how he needed to work for another hour. The words were ordinary, but beneath them there was a tension that neither of us voiced for some reason. And that moment is the most vague, the most blurred in my memory. Not because I was drunk, no, but because it was too fast, too emotionally rash. As if I didn't have time to understand what I was doing. We ended up closer. Too close. It wasn't a decision. It was a step. A small one. The wrong one. But enough to change everything. There was no romance. There was no duration. There was no story. It was a momentary mistake. A mistake doesn't need scenery. Second is enough. And then it ended as quickly as it began, as if someone had cut the thread connecting us to that moment. I understood what had happened. And at the same time, it was as if it hadn't happened to me. The drive home that evening felt surreal, as if the city was looking at me through glass, slightly distorting shapes. The lights seemed brighter than usual, the cars louder, and the people on the streets like moving shadows. I rode in the taxi, staring out the side window, thinking only one thing. How will I tell myself the truth about what happened? And will I tell myself at all? The taxi driver asked me something. The address clarified the turn, but his voice reached me as if through water. I nodded and answered as if on autopilot, but inside everything was strangely quiet. Devastatingly quiet. No euphoria, no forbidden joy. Just the heavy realization that I had crossed a line I never planned to cross. Something that happened in one brief moment, but now became part of my story, even if no one else would ever know about it. When the car pulled up to the house, I wanted to disappear. To dissolve. To become air. Or at least hold my breath so I wouldn't feel what was burning inside. Not even guilt, but a paralyzing awareness of my own weakness. The kind that makes you want to wrap yourself in a thick blanket and never go outside. But the door opened with a light click, and reality returned. I went in, took off my jacket, put down my bag, and the smell came from the kitchen. The smell of coffee. My husband used to make it in the evenings. He would leave a cup for the night to drink in the morning while I was still asleep. Not because it was romantic, but because it was his routine. His stable, calm, reliable routine of which I was a part. He looked out from the living room, his hair tousled, wearing an old favorite t-shirt that he had been wearing for 5 years. He was completely himself. No masks. No poses. "Are you back already?" he asked. And he smiled. A normal, familiar, homely smile. And at that moment it became physically difficult for me to breathe. I responded as if nothing had happened. My voice sounded steady. I said that I had had a fun evening, that the girls had laughed too loudly as usual, that I was tired, and that I would tell him the details tomorrow. And it sounded so natural that I surprised myself. It turns out that sometimes lies roll off the tongue more easily than the truth. He came over, put his arms around my shoulders and kissed me lightly on the temple, just like he always does without thinking. Just a sign that I was home, that I was with him, that everything was fine. And at that moment I felt, not guilt, but something else, something deeper. As if my heart responded with a quiet, painful twinge, as if something in it trembled because I had betrayed not a man, but the very structure of our life. That calm, steady, predictable life that we had built over the years, and which I had probably always taken for granted. I stood in his arms and thought, God, if only he knew. But he didn't know. And he never will. His gaze was open, warm, kind, the one I had seen thousands of times. The gaze of a man who believes in me, loves me, lives with me without any ulterior motives. He asked if I wanted tea, if I wanted to talk, if I wanted to share something. And I said again, tomorrow. Because I knew that if I opened my mouth now, I wouldn't be able to pull myself together. I wouldn't be able to appear whole. He nodded and went to his room, giving me space. That was his thing. He always sensed when I needed to be alone. And that was the hardest part. His gentleness, his trust, his familiar, I'm here for you. When I lay down in my bed next to him in our warm, cozy bedroom, it seemed to me that the walls were moving slightly, that the air was denser, that the silence was louder. I closed my eyes and realized one thing. I had returned home physically, but internally it was as if I were still standing on that cold balcony. And the scariest thing was that he didn't notice anything. But I couldn't forget. Many months have passed since that evening, but sometimes it seems to me that time doesn't move straight ahead but goes in circles. It takes me back to those seconds that I would like to erase, like an unsuccessful photo on my phone. Press delete, confirm the action, and that's it. But human memory doesn't work that way. It picks out the smallest, most insignificant moments and turns them into lines that you hear over and over again. This is not a love story. Not a romance. Not a secret passion that sweeps you off your feet. This is a story about how one small mistake can break down into hundreds of little memories that periodically bubble up like air bubbles in a closed bottle. The strangest thing is that I remember everything vaguely as if I had filmed it on an old phone. The blurred contours of the balcony, its shadow, the cool air, my own heart beating too fast. And at the same time, a crystal-clear awareness that I had crossed a line I had no intention of crossing. At first I thought I would forget. That this story would fade away like a random scratch on the skin. At first it hurts, then it fades, and soon there is no trace left. But the memory turned out to be different. It didn't hurt all the time, on the contrary, most of the time it was silent. I live my normal life. I make coffee in the morning, respond to work emails, argue over trifles, laugh at something, watch TV series. And it seems that I am the same person I used to be. The one who would never have done such a thing. The one who doesn't know what betrayal means. But sometimes, in the most ordinary moments, the memory flashes back. Not to punish me, no. But to remind me, it happened. And I have to live with that, it happened. Every time my husband says something warm, when he laughs at my jokes, when he tells a story from his work, I feel a slight, almost imperceptible twinge inside. Not because I'm afraid he'll find out, but because I know he'll never find out. And that absolute certainty is sometimes harder than any consequences. Sometimes it seems to me that I carry two women inside me. One is the one he sees. The other is the one who once allowed herself a moment of weakness. And the question is not which one is real. The question is how they will coexist in the future. I keep coming back to the theme of chance. It really was accidental. No flirting, no intention, no dark desire to destroy something in my life. Just a moment when my usual support swayed slightly. A moment that might not have happened if I had lingered in the bathroom for a minute. If I had ordered a different drink. If my friend had pulled me out to dance. But it happened. And now it's part of my inner story. I haven't told anyone about it, not because I'm afraid of being judged, but because telling means admitting it out loud. And admitting means understanding that I made a mistake that cannot be corrected. All I can do is live with it. My husband lives as he always has. He's by my side. He loves me. He doesn't notice anything unusual. And that's not because he's blind, but because everything in our life seems smooth, familiar, stable. But there is a crack inside me. It is small, invisible, like a thin line on glass that can only be seen from a certain angle. but I know it is there. And sometimes, only sometimes, I return to that evening and think of it not as an event but as a reminder. Even the strongest people can make mistakes in a moment. And the consequences sometimes live longer than the moment itself. This is not a story about betrayal. It is a story about human weakness. About how difficult it is to live with a memory that cannot be erased. And about how to continue to look into the eyes of a person who trusts you completely. I go on living. We go on living. But the part of me that stood on that balcony will stay with me forever. A quiet reminder that even one brief moment can change you forever. And no one but me will ever see it.